Welcome to the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup, being brought to you by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. I'm Susan Littlefield. To say it was another interesting week again in this trade, may have some shaking their heads. We saw some new lows happening in the new crop soybeans. We talk about the weather. Guys are anxious to get in the field, and now we've got some freeze warnings and even snow talked about for areas of the eastern Corn Belt. Mother Nature is just not letting up for this year's crop, but maybe if she brings some moisture, we'll all forgive her. We'll also take a look at the cattle on feed numbers that came out for a Friday, and we'll look at some global things happening as well. Stick around. We've got a lot on this week's episode.
Imagine a future fueled by soy-based possibilities. A future where creativity and productivity live together under one roof. A future that takes you from point A to point B to point Z, all while ensuring brighter tomorrows for our next generation. A soy-based future? It's already here.
Welcome back once again. As you can see, joining me, Sam Hudson. Sam is with Cornbelt Marketing, and of course, Alan Brugler with Brugler Marketing and Management. And gentlemen, to say Mother Nature may have a stronghold yet on what we're seeing. So, Alan, I think we're going to start with you as there pops you up first. What are you hearing and seeing from folks as they look at the eastern Corn Belt and wonder about this weather?
Well, you've got a lot of different situations. Some of my Ohio guys were saying that it was actually quite wet until about a month ago. Things had started to dry out. They were actually, if they had a more clay-based soil, they were actually hoping for just a little bit of moisture to loosen things up. The snow obviously is going to put them behind. You saw a lot more planting progress. Southern Indiana, Southern Illinois, Missouri was going gangbusters, but some of those more northern guys, this is just putting them a little further behind where they'd like to be. Historically, we don't plant a lot of corn in April as far as the national percentage of completion, but of course, as the technology's changed and seed treatments and things have changed, we've tended to move that cycle up a little bit.
Well, it's definitely been nice to see some of those pictures in the last couple of days popping up on social media of that new corn popping out of the ground. From a winter wheat perspective, areas of Oklahoma as well getting some needed moisture, but it might be a little bit too late.
Yeah, they're not. They are late. Some of the crop insurance adjusters are already out zeroing out some fields. I'm hearing from a lot of other producers saying, well, if we get an inch or so now and we get it some more in 2 weeks, that'll help quite a bit with what's still there. And that statement extends all the way from Texas up into central Nebraska. But yeah, in the heart of the D4 drought, some of that stuff's just too far gone.
Sam, what about for your neck of the woods? First of all, there in the eastern Corn Belt, you and I, when we were talking before we started the program, you got some snow possibly coming in for a Saturday into the weekend. And again, Mother Nature just not letting you guys get some field work done.
That's right. I don't think we're going to see anything, accumulating here in central Illinois, but very similar to what Alan alluded to. I mean, you get up I-80 and north, there really hasn't been a whole lot done anyways, as is typical this time of year. Usually got to wait till the first, second week of May to see some of the best planting windows anyways. But we have seen, all the way through, as far west as Des Moines, back through central Illinois, southern Illinois, as Alan was referring to, a lot of beans stuck in the ground, a good chunk of corn. I don't think you're going to have a lot at risk. There are some beans locally here that got stuck in really early that, could get nipped this weekend or that are emerged. But I don't know that the volume of emerged beans out there is so large that we should be concerned about it going into the weekend. The market certainly wasn't concerned about it. The real crux, I think, is as we get into this early May timeframe, if we can start shaping up temperatures and get folks in the field, it's going to eliminate any major initial fears on loss of planted area, and we're going to shift that narrative to yield de-icing as we get into June.
Well, I'm curious. I'm going to get both of your opinions on this drop, kind of a free fall, shall we say, happening in this grain complex. Sam, what's your take on what's been happening?
Yeah, we came into the week with some leftover concerns about that spring weather that we've talked about. We've seen energy markets in the 2 weeks leading up to this week can rise or at least offer some stability after a surprise OPEC cut several weeks back. But since Wednesday, we just haven't been able to find any footing. We got that chance for rains in the plains. We really didn't see any additional risk in the Black Sea with the situation going on there. We had energies falling, you had equities falling. and yet option expiration here, going into this Friday. And so all played a role to provide a lot of headwinds. And it's interesting to see Chicago Chicago wheat trade at parity with May corn here as we get into that option expiration and take that off the board. If you rewind just a little over a year ago, you were trading, over a $6 premium wheat to corn. And so the fact that we've taken all that off, I think is pretty interesting to see.
Alan, for you, what's your takeaway of this week's market trade?
Well, I think we do have to recognize the story about the Brazilian beans coming into the United States. Okay, we'd heard about that a couple of weeks ago, that there were some cargoes being sold for delivery to the U.S. East Coast. One of the wire services gave us very detailed information on which days next week they were leaving Brazil, which vessels they were on, and so forth. So it's a real event, and historically, it's not going to be a huge amount of volume, but it tends to break the rail basis to the East Coast and backs up into the central U.S. I think that the pressure on the old crop beans was because of this reality that there's going to be some Brazilian beans coming into the U.S. And they pencil, because Brazil's FOB prices are $1.50 to $1.80 a bushel lower than the U.S. offers out of the Gulf. It's just extremely cheap there right now. They've got good reason for that. They've got a record crop and don't have enough storage, and they're anxious to get that some of those beans out of the country. So I think that's a story on the beans. The wheat corn spread, I think, is another story. SRW is actually cheap enough to feed now, relative to corn. Now, that's not going to move into Oklahoma, Texas, and the grain deficit area, but it could be a factor going into the Southeast broiler and hog market.
Well, I was in Washington, D.C. this past week, and not only did we have folks within the USDA that were talking with us, but also lawmakers that were bringing up concerns when they were talking trade capabilities and workings. And I think it came down to lawmakers worried about China and Taiwan and the United States, knowing that Taiwan and the U.S. are trying to work together, but that China might be putting a little bit of extra pressure on Taiwan. Have you heard anything about that, Alan?
Well, China's putting a lot of pressure on Taiwan, but I think the thing you have to remember is that they're learning from the Russian-Ukraine situation that an outright invasion would be extremely expensive in terms of equipment, material, and people lost. And I think they would much prefer to coerce this Taiwanese into voluntarily or semi-voluntarily joining China. So I think you'll see a lot of movement that way. In Chinese, there's a term for it called United Front, which is trying to put pressure on Taiwan from all directions, but both internally and externally, both trade and political, et cetera, et cetera. Now, yeah, is that a big deal for us? Yes, because we are so dependent on China for our soybean exports, and actually quite a few other ag items. Their trade with China went over $40 billion last year, mostly because prices were higher. Volumes were similar to a couple of the recent years. But the point is, if that really got to the point where, say, they were trying to put a blockade around Taiwan and we had to either break the blockade or take countervailing measures against China on the trade front, ag is going to get caught in the crossfire.
Sam, you would think from a livestock perspective, they'd see the free fall we had in the grains this week and maybe have a temporary sigh of relief to some possible cheaper feeds.
Well, it is. Then you look at the feeder price and maybe it all offsets. I think we're going to continue to see kind of a bumpy, volatile ride there. And, this feed narrative is just going to continue to carry on into the summer and even harvest again and determining what's going to be needed, from corn, whether it's corn or wheat or grains in general. Really just what we're trying to figure out is how much grass is going to be available again. What's that mean as we look at herd expansion, herd sizes? We got cattle on feed report today. This is just going to be a talking point that I think really is a hinge point when you think about how tight cash grain has been. It really started in the West last year. It's still tight out there now, regardless of futures prices and flat prices and what we're determining now as we get into spring weather. But, it looks like we're leaving Nebraska out of the bulk of the rain here over the next several weeks. And if we don't get anything by June 1st, as I mentioned, we're shifting from potential concern about area to potential concern about where we're going to have our yield. And I think that comes upon us pretty quick, with all of this geopolitical situations, on top and amidst it.
What about the ugliness of the struggle these hogs? I mean, they finished a Friday with some positive numbers, but this hog market's really had its struggles as well.
Yeah, I think the only bright spot really this week was our export numbers pretty decent, but we just have not been able to find any traction for a couple of times over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Seemed like that cutout, in the league hog index could maybe base a little bit till we see any momentum there. It's just hard to get a lot of optimism, but as mentioned, nice to see something green on the screen here to end the week.
Well, you did talk about a cattle on feed report, Alan. As you look at those numbers, did you see any surprises?
I think the trade should be surprised that the feeder placements were as high as they were. We were only down 0.65% for the year over year for placements. Trade average guess was about 4% less. So there were a lot more cattle going into the feedlots than what the average trade guess had indicated. Now, that didn't have as big of an effect on the overall on feed number. We're down 4.4%. Trade was looking for 5%. So it's a little closer that way. But if you look at the technical setup, the market was rallying hard into the report. We were setting some life of contract highs this week and a little overbought technically. I think this is probably caught us leaning the wrong way. One other thing that I did notice, I didn't have a whole lot of time to digest the report, but I noticed that the heifer ratio did drop a little bit. Okay, the percentage of the livestock in the feedlots that are heifers had been 38+% a year ago, and now it's 37.87. So that suggests maybe just a couple more heifers being held back to be mama cows. But of course, the cow herd has been down tremendously over the last 2 years. So it's not by itself saying we're expanding cattle by any means.
All right. Well, both of you, thank you for joining us this week. And as we always want to remind folks, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss not suitable to all investors. And that's this week's Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup.